Today on the Ben and Tony podcast, we welcome Parry Ravindranathan. He's worked for the who's who of the media world, CNN, Al Jazeera, CNBC, and his career most lately culminated in the presidency and international managing director role over at Bloomberg Media. He shared rich insights throughout this episode on traditional versus non-traditional media career paths, the role of the journalist in society, the erosion of trust in big institutions and the opportunities that presented from that, as well as expanding a media company across borders, and that's just to name a few. Parry is humble, he's incisive, and he's worth hearing.
As the former president and managing director of Bloomberg Media International, Parry is one of the very few people in the world with a truly unique first-hand perspective on the evolution of global media. Spurred on by words of encouragement from a senior media executive who once told him, "You are destined for greater things," Parry has had an exciting career in international business and journalism that has spanned 3 continents and brought him to over 100 different countries. In a time where we are seeing geographic shifts in innovation to the east, Parry's experiences in Asia and the Middle East gave him special insight on where the world is heading. The story of Parry is a story of the future of media, and I hope you enjoy the discussion.
And we're very, very excited to be sponsored by the Making Lemonade Fund, Gen Z's fastest growing fundraiser, supporting COVID-19 relief, pediatric cancer, and a bunch of other great causes. Get behind them over at makinglemonadefund.com and sponsor Made by our very own Jesse K.
On to the podcast where we're joined by Parry Ravindranathan.
Thank you so much for having me, guys. Thank you.
Well, we've got some very interesting transitions in your life to talk about. When you're young and you're studying things like media, does the career path seem obvious when you think about 20, 30 years down the line? Because let's say I was a 19-year-old right now and I wanted to get into the media industry, journalism. It sounded like you ended up doing a lot of different things, as time went on. But when you were, let's say, in your early 20s, did you think, okay, I want to be an amazing anchor or a reporter or a writer or be the head of a media company in like more of like an executive role? Did you have that path?
Yeah, well,
right now?
I did. I don't think everyone does, to be very honest with you. I think, in fact, a lot of my batchmates from college, my university batchmates, many of them never really became journalists. I think they didn't end up as journalists, and many of them moved on to other things. But I did. I think, as I kept going on, I became more and more ambitious. I had these I used to always tell some of my friends, and they used to make fun of me, and rightly so, that, by 30, I want to be a managing editor. I was never interested in being an anchor, actually. That was never that. I never tried it. And, here and there, they put me on and I was not good at it. I was made, I had a face for radio more than this thing. So I didn't really, or the voice for TV. So I always wanted to lead a newsroom. It was obviously the ambition that, I wanted to be a managing editor of a network by 30. I wanted to be, to run a media company by 45. I had these, I think in some weird kind of ways, I kind of managed to hit those slightly before target by sheer luck.
Nice.
But I always wanted to, own a media company at some point.
Yeah.
So yeah, I did have an ambition. And I think that was from a very early age. I had the ambition to kind of go that route, but it was not, I don't think it was that common, because many of them don't think of, many people, I joined journalism during a big media explosion in journalism in India, where I come from. It was when suddenly TV was growing. TV was literally at the inflection point at that time, when I joined. So that was, again, just pure fortune. Newspapers were still very dominant and continued to be dominant for many years later. Digital was just starting out. In fact, the first company I joined was a little media a company called India.com, which got bought out by Murdoch. It was insane. It was a vertical, actually. It was basically a horizontal, basically it had everything. It had news was just one part of it. News was one vertical. It was a horizontal site. But that was just the boom time where, these things were going on. So the opportunity looked, it looked pretty what the future looked very bright. So you could have that ambition.
And
It was
actually, at
different.
that point, there's so many different kind of new media companies which are emerging. So, say you're a fresh graduate going through that same thing today. Do you go through that traditional route, or would you have done something else today?
I think I would not follow the traditional route at all, because I don't think there is a route. I don't think there's a fixed route anymore. I don't know whether you can even think that this is the path of how I'm going to go for journalism school and this is how my career will look. Um, yes, there are some great institutions still out there which basically which still would be in your top list, no matter what. My belief is in 10 years time too, those will still be in your top list for journalism careers. So as a journalist, it's still the names with cachet. But I think the approach has changed dramatically. Even the skills have changed, I'll be honest. I mean, I think uh, there was a time when you had to, you chose to be a print journalist, you chose to be this or that. I think that's all gone. You basically need to be multi-skilled to survive. You cannot just assume that you're going to be a print journalist and kind of stick to that line. You basically need the skills to be a video journalist. You need the social media skills. You need this skill or that skill. I just think that's evolving quite dramatically. I don't think if I was starting today with the skills that I had, when I was in college, I don't know whether I would have actually made it. I think I would have had to. It would be a fairly big evolution for me. So it would be a big change.
Well, uh, if I've got the timeline correctly, one of the big moments where you kind of had to discover what you really wanted to do next was when you were in your 20s. At the time, you were working at CNBC in India. Is that correct? And then you decided to take a big leap and travel to Afghanistan.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about that story and the impact that's had on your life and also the context leading up to that? I mean, I told you earlier that to me that the idea of traveling to Afghanistan in 2006 specifically, I'd go today probably, but 2006, that's a big decision filled with lots of risk. So how did that happen?
Yeah. I think I always wanted to do something in the conflict. This thing. I mean, I have to say that there are people who have done incredible work, and I don't think they get the credit they should, because most people don't realize how dangerous it is. Most of it is, you see from movies and all sort of things, and you think there's only that much, it can't be that dangerous. No, it is extremely dangerous. So I think, to be honest, it's again fortune. I think I did not know what to do after the CNBC thing. For various reasons I left, and it's one of the TV18 was one of the best companies I worked with, for, and I still think that laid the foundations to what I am today in a lot of ways. But it reached a point where I thought I wanted to do other things. I grew very quickly in a place like TV18 because the whole company was growing, so I got kind of pulled up with it. So I had skill gaps, and I'll be the first to admit that I became a boss very young, too young, which leaves huge gaps in your skill sets. At that time, if someone asked me to actually go produce an entire show, I think I would do a scratchy job of it, because I was just I just became, I was managing people at a very young age, managing producer at a young age. So in some ways that was my thinking, I'll get out and, I need to kind of be in a slightly more, a newsroom where I kind of learn from, people above me. But, when I left, I was in two minds about what to do. Al Jazeera had not come about by then. And I just decided I'm going to do this. I'm going to travel and see what, I can do. And by sheer luck, there was someone actually hiring. So Indians at that time could go into Afghanistan fairly easily because, our passports, our visas. So that's a big factor.
Yeah.
Being an Indian is a huge disadvantage or being where I'm from, being, from the emerging world. It's not an easy one to break into the global international thing, because what, as an American or as a Brit, you kind of take for granted you can walk into any place with a visa. I need a visa into all the 100 countries I've been to, 109 countries I've been to. I need a visa for most of them, including, by the way, Somalia. I've been to Somalia, and I can tell you I needed a visa there. So So the thing is, Afghanistan that way was fairly easy to get into. I got in there because someone actually led me to it. Someone said there's some non-journalism work going on there, which was, there's an archaeological dig, etc. Do you want to come and join us and try and do something with us? So which I did, which I went for a sort of archaeological-led work that was going on, outside of Kabul, towards Kandahar actually, and that's how I landed there. And then, of course, I actually did very little of that, and neither, I don't think anyone really found anything, that sort of history making. And then I got to travel a lot, and then I traveled across, across Afghanistan, and I actually did go all the way up north, and crossed into Uzbekistan. I wanted to see the Blue Mosque, uh, you know, and I actually managed to, go all the way up there and come back. This is a hugely defining time of my life, because I actually also kind of realized that I could do this. I think is always a big question mark, when you're in a newsroom and, sitting in a gallery, sitting in an office, you kind of are taking these journalistic decisions, but it's a completely set of circumstances which you are dealing with when you're on the ground, in a
Right.
place like that. And I think it taught me a lot of things. And, and over time, I think that allowed me to become a better leader, because I couldn't understand it. I'll be honest, when I used to deploy people, I used to always, when I was younger, I couldn't fully understand what their concerns were, or what they thought the challenges were, or what the challenges were on the ground. I think this kind of taught me that there are a lot of things there that I don't fully comprehend, and as a leader, I must be able to comprehend that and actually take that on board, and be able to kind of be able to absorb that, and then take a decision based on what that's coming back. So in some ways, that's a huge influence on the way I thought of my career overall, and certainly the way I looked at journalism, because I think you go from imagining that the journalism of doing a show, a business show or something like that, is what journalism is. It's not. What is really, it is one part, is a very important part, but there's that entire world which you're putting your life at risk for, which is
Yeah,
which is
and that's fascinating to me. I remember reading Frank Gardner's autobiography after his paralysis in, I think it was in Saudi Arabia in 2004,
yeah.
and it was one of the most compelling stories of journalism I've ever read in my life. I just got a chill up my spine when I was speaking about it. Um, and I think it shows such pure journalism when you're on the ground, putting yourself in harm's way
Oh yeah.
for a story like this. I'd love to know from you kind of how you think about the role of a journalist, and what that real, like in its most pure form, what is a journalist trying to do?
I think for me, the most important part of journalism is a certain amount of objectivity. It's not possible to be 100% objective. You have your subjective views. Even if it's not, for whatever reason, could be even subconscious. You like this politician, you don't like this politician. You agree with something that's going on the ground. You disagree with. I think the most important thing, at least as far as I'm concerned, is being able to tell what you see. I think that's the first rule of it. You got to be able to to basically to kind of describe something with taking the emotion and the subjectivity out of it. And then, of course, you can, if something that's happening in front of you is abjectly wrong, and it's actually, that happens, quite a lot of time. You should be able to define that as well. I'm not saying that you remove the right and wrong out of it. Not at all. In fact, I think that's where journalists are more than just recorders. We're not just documenting. We are basically telling you a draft of history in some ways. So it's, you should be able to define that. But I think some of these are kind of the fundamental basis of what journalism is. You should be able to say it as you see it, and then, of course, be able to define the right and the wrong in it. And that's and the unfortunate part of the defining of the right and wrong, what's happening today is we are led, that is almost entirely colored by partisanship. anywhere in the world. It is, we are probably living in the most divisive time, in we'll ever see. I think it's like it's I've never in my career seen a time where people question facts. There were certain the defined sort of facts that you agreed that those were kind of those were implicit in some ways. Those are things that you were kind of agreed upon. Those agreed upon virtues and those agreed upon facts have essentially eroded. No one agrees even on those basic, sort of things. So that's why you see, Trump saying, those elections were fraud, and the whole bunch of people saying it's all fraud,
Yeah.
because you're just not agreeing on even the basic parameters on which you agreed upon before.
Yeah.
So I mean that's kind of literally, sort of torn down the foundations of what we have built over 100 years, 100 plus years. So I think, now more than ever, I think you need to be able to rebuild those set of parameters, and of course be able to actually, kind of sort of be less partisan in the way you're sort of reporting things. And I think it's a much harder job. I don't envy the guy who enters journalism today, because he or she is dealing with a much more complex world, a much more complex, what do you call it, narrative, a much more, a much more blurred sort of right and wrongs in some cases. Some of them are quite out there, and a much less of a foundation to build yourself on. I think that foundation has been attacked in a very big way.
Totally. And I guess that erosion of trust between what just people and institutions or the media they're reading, obviously it's incredibly sad, and it has a lot of problems that come with that. But do you see any opportunities that emerge from that? Maybe it's for kind of folks who are looking to set up a new kind of media business.
Yeah, I mean, there's a huge opportunity. I think the opportunity for anyone, it lies in itself in doing simple things. If you can do the simple good journalism, there's an opportunity already. Simply because it's just ended up so partisan at the moment, that just doing that and being able to tell both sides of a story and being able to do the basics of it is itself an opportunity. And you're seeing that, by the way. I think, while as much as we all talk about the decline of journalism and decline of media companies, etc., there is also companies that are growing. In the New York Times, it's still a gold standard, or Washington Post, gold standards. And you could go back 40 years and they were breaking news even then, and you can come 40 years down, they're still breaking the news. They are finding Trump's tax returns. They found the Watergate and the Pentagon Papers, and today you still rely on those guys to find these kind of. So journalism, in my view, is still well and alive in pockets, in very big pockets. And these are big pockets. They're not small media companies. They're big media companies, which are continue to thrive. And then there are these new ones, the Politicos and the Axios, and which are really coming and actually thriving. They're growing enormously by basically being able to tell it as they see it. They're not aligned one way or the other. They're kind of making sure that they're reporting what they see. So the opportunity is huge. I think the challenge is that we are living in a time where you have populists, and basically we are living in an age of strongmen who have attacked the institutions pretty much across the board. That is in any place you can think of now, where the institutions have been attacked so much that covering those institutions in itself has become slightly more difficult. But I'm hopeful that this is kind of we're kind of getting to a stage where people are fatigued by that, and people want to know more, the truth, the more, more facts. They want to know more about something, and I do believe that creates more opportunities. So I think the opportunities are plenty. It's just that I think every media company will have to evolve quite quickly, and the challenges are not just the actual story itself, but the platform. They got to decide on the platforms. Facebook and Google are eating their lunch on their advertising business, and then they got to figure out a way to actually still cover the story and grow the audience, etc. So I think the challenges are slightly multi-pronged.
sounds like this desire for objectivity and the sense of empathy, a lot of it came from perhaps that Afghanistan trip was literally one of the biggest exercises in empathy you could have. You know, you literally go to a place that is so different, that challenges you in ways culturally, safety wise, makes you think about what being a journalist really means. In that moment, when you, how long did you spend in Afghanistan? Was that for a long
3
time?
months. No,
3 months, yeah.
About 2.5, 3 months, maybe.
So in that condensed 3-month period, at the end of it, what did you come out thinking about what your next step was?
Oh, I mean, I didn't have much time actually. Weirdly, I thought of then going for academics. I almost joined academics in the UK. I wanted to do economic history, which is something that I had been thinking for a long time. It's still a subject that's dear to me, and just out of the blue, I got this job offer, and I actually not job offer. Someone told me about Al Jazeera English, and I wrote to the guy who was heading it, and said that I would like to join, and he said, I'm not sure there's a position at the moment. So he said, I told him that I'll do one thing. I will come on my own accord. You just get me a visa. I will pay for myself, and I'll come. And I think it kind of, he was surprised. I don't think he was he was fairly surprised that actually I did that, and and he said, no, don't worry about it. We'll send you the thing. And then he offered me a job. Now I was very senior in my job before that, and I kind of took a position down to take this job because I wanted to work with people who were better than me. And I have to say, Al Jazeera was a place where I found people better than me, and I think much better than me. And I had to catch up. I could see that I had to catch up to the guys there. In fact, I made some of my closest friends there because I made friends there who are friends for life. In fact, I mentioned it to you. One of them just joined, TV News to head TV New Zealand, where you are, and he was someone I learned the craft of television. I mean, I didn't realize how much I didn't know, and I learned a huge amount of how to make decisions, etc. And actually crafting of a television, of a video sort of environment. So I think so to answer your question, I didn't really get that much time to actually procrastinate about what that looked like. I actually ended up going to the next thing, and I have to admit it's pretty much moved the same way out of Al Jazeera into Bloomberg as well, because I didn't really get enough time to think about whether this is the way I want to go or that way I want to go. The opportunities just came, and I just didn't. The only thing I thought of is whether I like it or not. And I'm fairly bullheaded about the liking and non-liking part, which has always been my strength and weakness. The strength is that I'm very decisive in it. So if this is what I want, and I go with it. The weakness is that sometimes I take that decision very quickly, and I don't really. It has worked out so far. I don't know it'll work out all the time.
So the next big transition moment and decision you had to make then was when you were 30 years old and you got offered a really big job opportunity then. Could you tell us the story behind that leading up to it, and also what was going through your head, decision making when it came to that?
Yeah, I was not looking for that job. It was, again, I had gone for another job in London. I'd gone for a job interview, another job. And I got a call from one of my close friends and mentor, a guy called Steve Clark, who was before that my boss at Al Jazeera. He was a director of news, a brilliant guy. And he called me and said, look, there's this job going, because I had written to him about, I was thinking of, doing other things. I wanted his advice. And he said, there's this job going in India. Do you want to take that job? And I have to admit that I was not up for going back home at that time.
What was the job?
It was to run, basically to be executive producer of a channel that Bloomberg had partnered with. And I was not sure. I was like, this doesn't seem like I want to do this. So I got a pretty good offer from another company, and I won't name it because I didn't go through with it. And I actually got that job, and it was a much bigger job. And, I was like, that's what I'm going to do. But then a day later, I got a call from Steve Clark saying that, look, Steve, and Steve is someone I never say no to. So he said, look, come in and meet Andy Lack, who's a was a big deal in the world I come from. Andy was the CEO of Sony. If you've heard of him, he had this protracted battle with Steve Jobs. He's very well known for that. And before that, he had a sort of storied media career because, he was the president of NBC. He was one of the first. Him and Dan Rather were the first journalists to get into Afghanistan. And there's Charlie Wilson. You've seen the movie Charlie Wilson's War that actually has some description of that. It's kind of, he's a storied journalist. He's a very well-known guy. And I said, I'm not going to say no to meeting him. If nothing else, it's a meeting with him. He hates my guts, and I'm out of the door. And I kind of escaped that bullet. And I went in for the job interview, and it was supposed to be a 15-minute, 20-minute window. It went on for much longer. And at the end of it, Andy just said, "So when are you joining?" Later on, I realized that that's just how he functions.
What did you do?
He likes someone. He kind of, sorry, and I was like, "Oh, actually, let me think about it," sort of thing. He just said, "Look, what do you want? What do you want?" And you got the job. And I was upfront with him, saying that I just don't want to be closeted back in India and sort of things. He said, "Look, you're made for bigger things. Believe me, we are expanding quite dramatically in the next few months, and there will be opportunities." So I kind of, I could see that the job that I was joining was a much bigger job, but my first order of business would have been to cut down the number of people.
Everyone is wondering what you said in that interview.
Yeah. So I don't know. I think. I think in some way, I mean, when I ask Andy, and Andy's a mentor to me, I don't think anyone has made more of an impact on my career in the way I think about things than an Andy in the initial days, especially because I was so young, because I was literally thrown in the deep end, and I needed a lot of support at that time. I think he says that he just thought that I loved it. I loved what I do. He said that I had so many ideas that I threw it every 2 minutes. I wanted to do this, and I wanted to do I kind of explained the business part a lot, which I loved, but I never thought I would get a job in that side. I always thought in our world, it's siloed. The business side is always siloed from the editorial side. So I think at the end of it, he just thought that I would be. I don't know what clicked in him. I can't define. I don't know. He's never defined it to me. But he just said that I just felt that my instinct told me that here's a guy who just loved it as much as I did. And as loved both sides of it, which he loved because he managed both. And then I went back to India. I went to India, did this for about 3 months. 3 months later, I got a call, as promised, from Andy saying, "Find your replacement in India, and figure out your timing to move." And that was about the time that I met my wife, and I was going to get married, and I was like, oh shit, it's like oh god, the timing is horrible. And then I kind of stretched it, and said, okay, maybe 3 months time, there's a lot of work to do here. And I was like, anyway, finally at some point there was a huge Japan, the big earthquake in Japan, which obviously turned out to be tsunami, etc. And then he that was a big turning point. He just said, "I want you there now. It's you need to get yourself there." And he said, just before I joined, he said, "Look, these are the parameters of the job. You're running the business, the television business. You got to figure out what you're going to do with it." I just had to. I took it, and then the only thing I told him is that I want to be given enough leeway to take risks, and he gave me that. He did not let me down. At the same time, I had interviewed the chairman of Bloomberg at the time, Peter Grauer, as well. And I have to admit, the three people above me at the time, there's Andy Lack, and then there was Dan Doctorow, who's the CEO, and Peter Grauer, the CEO of Bloomberg, and Peter Grauer, the chairman. They never really interfered. I took a lot of risk that I thought at times said, this is it. I'm probably going to get fired. And most of it on the business side. And where I was still learning, if you know what I mean. So I was, they let me be and let me do my thing. So in some ways, it's that taking that job was a huge turning point, because I'm not sure that any other job I would have taken at that time would have taken me up this path and got me to understand so many parts of the media business that I began to understand over time.
Hey,
I
can
don't
you
know
tell
whether
us a bit
that
more?
answers your question.
No, it does. Can you tell us more about like the specifics of the job, what your responsibilities were, the immensity of that, and also why perhaps someone generally at that age with that experience, probably it's quite a stretch on paper.
I think, I think more than the age, because I think the age is, you do find people who get there young. I mean, I think it's, there are people who got there younger than me. I think it's rare to find jobs in which you control both. Can you lead a newsroom by 30? Of course you can. There are some incredibly brilliant people who have done it even earlier, and have had some really incredible careers. Can you become a CEO of a media company in 30? Of course. I mean, like, there are platforms who have, become CEOs by 24, 25. I think where for me was the industry rarely allows or rarely has people who do both the business and journalism at the same time. And certainly not at the young age. So in a lot of ways, that was a risk that they took. It was not a risk for me. I think it was an opportunity for me. They took a big risk on this thing. And for me, the challenge was that I'd never done things like sales. I'd never done a sales presentation. I didn't know what a PowerPoint deck, because in the world I come from, there were no PowerPoint decks. Journalists don't sit and make PowerPoint decks. There's no time for it. And whereas in this world, everything was on a PowerPoint deck. You needed to buy a small screw, you needed a PowerPoint deck for it. So it was just essentially two completely different worlds. And I was lucky again, because Andy said build your team, and the team that was in place at that time, and Yuri, who was a TV head, was already there heading programming. There was a fairly large number of people I knew from before. There's a guy called Paul Tyson who's managing news gathering. So a lot of people I knew already who had already got hired. On the sales side, there was this Kiwi guy who was one of the straightest shooters I've ever met. I met him, and the first thing that came to me is he told me exactly what the challenges of the business were. He just said, these are the challenges of the business, and this is what we do, which made my job much easier. So he actually did most of my work. No, but he needed quick decisions. He needed a bunch of things. On the distribution side, we had to, those days we used to, the distribution had to be, we were looking at expanding distribution. So I needed a lot of leeway on the distribution side, which no one realizes how big a challenge it is. And frankly, I got, I got a basically, blank sheet of paper, and they said, just go do it. So I had to think of so many parts of it. First, fixing the content piece, and then fixing the business can get fixed only around the content. So I actually first focused on the content part. Once you've got that right, then you kind of fixed everything around it. It took me, it took us about a year to all fix it, for it all to come together. And once the momentum came, I think it was easier to build. And then in 2013, my new boss was a guy called Justin Smith, who founded Quartz, and was in Atlantic Media. Again, had a storied career in that part of the world. And then everything was about how do you build the entire digital piece out in a much bigger way. So it was again starting that from scratch, because it was highly centralized in New York for many years, and then kind of building the teams and kind of building out the digital businesses over the next 2 or 3 years.
That's fascinating. And I mean, this is a huge opportunity for you coming into this role. You had a lot of experience in half of it, but the rest was kind of a big learning curve for you. How did you think about kind of day one to day 100, what you should do, how you should get to grips with this new thing?
So I kind of, it's a really good question, because that is usually the single biggest challenge, because I think that is the time when you're either going to sink or swim, really, the first 100 to 150 days. because everyone gives you a leeway for about 3-4 months. After that it gets, let's see some results. Uh, I got slightly longer time. Andy knew that I was new, and everyone knew that I was new to this. They knew the challenges that come with it, and I got slightly longer. But I think what I did was I kind of laid out goals. I laid out days, basically X number of months to fix the content piece. Hiring was a big part of it, because I think you can have the best plan in the world and not be able to move an inch if you cannot hire the best people for that job. And so I kind of focused on 3 or 4 things. I think hiring was one of them. Fixing the product was the second part, and then the business, because I think the business kind of already starts showing promise the moment you fixed the first two. So I kind of lay down milestones for where I should get on hiring, in 2 months' time, and product 4 months more than that. I mean, 6 months overall, and then the business another 6 months. So I kind of laid out these rules, and I have to say we hit almost all of them. There's no credit to me; it was more credit to the team. They they really hit every point of it because everyone wanted it, and there was a lot of, let's fix this sort of thing. My job was just motivate. Everyone else was doing the hard job of actually getting it all up and running. So the first 100 days, really, you have to plan out. You have to kind of see what the end result, what you want at the end of it. For me, what I wanted at the end of it was a great team, a product that is improving over time. You may not have fully fixed it. It's never fully fixed, and which is improving and actually gathering momentum, and then a business that's beginning to grow. So these are the three things that I kind of focused on in the first 100 days. It was more like 150 or 160 days, but that's what I really focused all my energies into.
So one of the lines that you said earlier that still is actually kind of stuck in my head since you said this a few minutes ago is when Andy Lack said to you, "You're destined for bigger things," in his first meeting with you. And clearly, as time went on and you started getting more and more responsibility to eventually being, like the head of Bloomberg Media International, did those words still like echo in your head? Because what's fascinating to me is some of the people we've interviewed actually, it was like one moment, like one conversation when they were younger, where like a senior person has inspired them. Like, for example, one of our other guests, he was about to drop out of his career trying to be an artist until one lecturer said, "No, keep drawing. I believe in you." And then now he's like an award-winning illustrator. And I think back to, I don't know if those words had an impact on you to the same degree. I mean, you obviously mentioned those words, but as you like fast forward 10 years later, did you still did that help motivate you over those last 10 years? Do you think that you would have been the same if he didn't say that?
Well, I think it hugely. He doesn't remember anything this anymore, and we talk about it, and he said, "Do I really say that?" And yeah, I said that's stuck in my head. But the thing is, it did, because it was coming from someone who was basically the top of the game, legendary figure at the top of his game, and someone who actually knew the content piece more than anyone else I know. I mean, still, I don't know anyone who loves content as much as he does. He loves news. He's just a news hound. So coming from him, that was a big compliment, or I don't even know if it's compliment, because I always assume that there's a little bit of marketing job to you, because I do it myself, right? Like, you always do it as you grow. You kind of know there's a marketing job to you. But I think it was a big motivator in the sense that I knew that I was competent to be in the big league, to get when you're at that time when I was joining, there were 2 or 3 questions in my head. One, are you competent enough to be in there? Two, are you can you thrive in an environment that is in some ways alien to you? Because it is, breaking from domestic media in India to breaking to the international is a fairly big jump. It's a fairly big jump with its limitations. I'm Indian. It's, the lot of assumptions that come with it. So it is a fairly big sort of climb up to that. And then someone telling you that, I think, you can do the job. I think you'll do it really well, and you trust you with it. I think was a big motivator. When I look back, because it made me less risk averse. Let me put it that way. You know, and I think if anyone would, any one strength, if there's only one strength I had to name for me, for me climbing, is that I'm very very I'm almost have an affinity for risk.
Love it. Love it.
I take risks. And I think in some ways it's been shaped by what my how my career has gone. Today, whatever decision I make is not going to kill anyone. It's there will be some failure, but nothing I do, no decision I make made at Bloomberg would have killed anyone. So in some ways, I knew that's I've already taken the big risks, both with my life as well as putting others at risk. So now whatever I do is going to be nothing compared to that. So I think in some ways I approached the job at Bloomberg that way. That what is my worst case scenario? I lose my job, and I can take that, and went from there.
That's so great. And one of the other things you just said as well was that you suddenly were kind of pushed onto the world stage of media. And that's a pretty interesting stance and viewpoint that you had then, because you're looking across, EMEA, APAC, but you're also working for an American company. Would love your kind of take on the differences in the way media is reported across the globe, and also, what kind of opportunities you think might be emerging from that.
So I think, again, I think one of the lucky things is Bloomberg is a very global company, highly global. It's more global than, more than half of Bloomberg LP, there's a mother company's revenue comes from outside the US, and that's public, that's in the public domain. And so in some ways that Bloomberg, and certainly Mike Bloomberg and the top management essentially always viewed everything as a global play. It was an opportunity to be able to dominate elsewhere, because American Bloomberg's a fairly new media company. It's only 35 years old as in its existence. That is Bloomberg LP, and the media company is much later. It's in the 90s. And so most of his media assets. So it's a very young media company, whereas there are these established players which have been there for many years. So in some ways, the media market in the US is so competitive that a company like Bloomberg thought that there's a fairly large opportunity to dominate outside the US because it's slightly less taken. And I think it's right. We dominated in Asia, we dominated in Europe because our competitors, whether it's CNBC or anyone, were not as entrenched as they were in the US. So it's so that was the first big thing, because there was an opportunity. And it was a time when everyone was globalizing their newsrooms. They were changing and trying to look at other opportunities. China, all these were growing quite a lot. And there was actual move to the east, which is it's an actual real push towards the east, which was less this thing. American companies tend to, when an American media company tells you global, they essentially mean the United States.
Yeah.
They don't really mean global. It's basically Manhattan. There's a small, that's like any media company. That's so when then when they all realize that there is a world outside of 57th Street, that's when you kind of realize, oh God, that's there's an opportunity. And I think there was that moment in the 2010, 11 when everyone looked at it as an opportunity to grow, and Bloomberg grew. Bloomberg Media grew. We were not constrained by resources. We were allowed to grow, and we were allowed to take risks and actually take that forward. And for me, in some ways, it allowed me to learn as well. So we kind of started all sorts of things. We started TV channels in different parts of the world. Licensed and in partnership, but at the same time looked at different languages to get into. I think there was a realization somewhere around 2010, 2011 that if media had to grow, it had to grow global. Otherwise, it's never going to be a thing. And I have to say, while we blame the platforms, in some ways, that is a platform experience kind of played with that. Google, for instance, or Facebook was growing more in India than any other part of the world. So that told us that, look, these guys have gone there and actually grown. There's something there, you know. So in some ways, if the world changed, and we were trying to. I think media overall was trying to catch up with it, and I was fortunate enough to be in a position to have actually been that global citizen because of living different. I grew up in Oman, in Muscat, in Oman, and I studied later years boarding school. I was in India, but then went to study in the UK. My first job was in India, but then went to the Middle East. I traveled a lot in Africa. So it's like, by sheer coincidence, my profile matched someone who actually they wanted, who had a global experience, not just in media, but more of living as a global citizen. So it was fortunate.
Yeah, and I guess that's really interesting in that it's not just about the growth rate; it's about meeting the cultural nuance of each place that you want to grow
Yeah.
to. You know, if you were to give advice to maybe a smaller media company who's looking to expand from the US now, how do you do that with enough cultural sensitivity to make sure that it can be a success in whatever country it is you're going to?
First advice I would do is hire a local. Don't try to parachute someone from the US into Asia and expect the guy, he or she, to learn the nuances within even a year, because the nuances are there. It's not easy. It is some of these. I mean, there is no similarity between an Indian market and an Australian market. There's no similarity. They all come in the same region. Even Asia Pac is kind of a weird, cultural packing of a lot of things into one region, and that's mostly done by someone sitting far away. So that's the one thing that you learn the moment you come here. Most of them really learn that no, Japan is not a bus distance from Beijing. You know, it's far away. So I think that's the one thing I always tell everyone: is hire someone who's got local experience. Ideally, hire someone from the region, because that person will know not just the cultural nuances, but will know his or her way around building products. They will know what products work and what don't. No amount of research sitting by a bunch of guys sitting in the US will ever be able to capture that. It's a fact. And some of the most successful companies, tech companies in the world, have become far more sort of far more regional in the way they function. In India, Facebook or Google will always hire an Indian guy in the market who knows it really well, who reports into the US, and to run it independently. And the most successful of all of them have all done that. So I think that's the first thing I would advise. The second thing is be tolerant of risk, because I think these are not, most of the world is not a structured market. They're not like US domestic market, which is over the period of time evolved and become structured. There are certain institutions where if you see Fox News, you'd think it's not, but it is more it's more structured. But the thing is, it is there are certain things you can take for granted. In the developing world, that's not true, because there are a lot of things evolving. Technology has taken leaps here. you know Everyone ends up, the United States is no more the technological capital of the world. It's something that we'll have to live with. The world has to live with. What when they're Facebook and a lot of these guys are trying to enter payment gateways with what's in the chat apps. These guys have done it. These guys have had it for years. And they know how to monetize it as well. So you have to have that humility to say that these are markets that are moving at an incredible pace that is not set by the West. It's been set by them. And so you have to come with that humility and actual sort of ability to learn from them, rather than trying to dictate it, because the world has changed in the last 15-20 years. And I think that's a really, so most companies should come with a willingness to be able to evolve to that situation, rather than hope that the market evolves to you, basically. I think those are the two most important things when you look at it from a company perspective. Everything else will evolve with it. Product, etc., will evolve with that.
Yeah. Given the last 10 years of what you've done at Bloomberg and your ability to see this intersection of all these different trends, like being in such a senior media role that oversees so much of this, you probably have quite a knowledgeable worldview that most other people don't have when it comes to seeing these trends geographically, technology-wise, media-wise. And now you're in an interesting transition period of your own, where you're leaving Bloomberg, or, and if you've left already, how do you see the world right now, both in terms of what your future might be, and also where the world's going? What's the transition period you're going through right now?
I think, I mean, it is a huge transition because, in some ways you kind of, I think I left Bloomberg not because I had anything, Bloomberg was an incredible place for me. I grew there. I met some of the kindest people there, some of the smartest people there. The management on top were brilliant human beings, and in the way they kind of let me do my thing. I left largely because I in some ways you hit a glass ceiling. It's not a glass ceiling constructed by a company, but really your own glass ceiling, where you look at it and say, is this the job I want to do, or is that what I want to do here in this media company, or is there something else that I want to try out and do other things? So I reached that point, I think, and I had done this job for many years. I kind of went through many management changes, and I kind of did this for very, very long, from a very young age to what I am. So, and I kind of looked at it as something that I've done everything I can with this. Even from a company perspective, my suggestion to them always has been that someone fresh should look at the company, because my eyes are less fresh when it comes to this company. And I wanted to do the same somewhere else, where I wanted to be able to look at something else, in a sort of slightly more objective way, and kind of learn something. And I think you'll stop learning after a point, and I stopped learning. And I think for me, it was about leaving and learning something new, learning different parts of a new industry in you. So I angel invest in different companies. I've always done it, and Bloomberg was kind enough to allow me to do things which was non-media, etc. And I learned a lot from those, and I allowed me to kind of invest in things that I always say that angel investing often is vanity, because you kind of invest in a lot of things that you actually don't know much about, but you think you know much about. So you invest in an AI company, which I did, just because somewhere in my head, I'm a journalist, I've read about it, I know a lot about it. Actually, it's not.
Sounds sexy.
It kind of reflects my vanity that I actually know something about it. So actually, which is what I did, and I think it needed my attention in some ways, and I started looking at different things to do. Will I go back to media? Potentially, yes, because I love it. And I think after leaving it 6 months down, when the US elections was on, the thing that I missed most was being in the newsroom. And my wife kept saying that, I don't know, because I was frustrated. I was like, oh God, I was like, I wish I was in the newsroom right now. And I was itchy. I watched it through the night and through the thing. And I missed that. And I think, so I would love to, there are parts of it that I really miss. But I've outgrown some of the aspects of doing some of the jobs that I used to do. So in some ways, I have to redefine what I want to do in media, but it'll probably be not the same kind of things I've done before, and find an exciting space or company that actually I would want to work with, and who allow me to do something different and build something different. So, so this transition phase is a slightly different one, where I have no pressures, which I've had in my previous transitions. I have no financial pressures. I think I've passed that stage in my career. I have no pressures to actually take something up because I want to build up my CV. So yeah, it's kind of a unique time, which has. I wish I had more pressure. I'll be honest with you, because it kind of hurries you up a little bit more, and I work well under pressure. But in some ways, it's also liberating, because I can do things that I can find a company that I want to invest in. I can play in the stock markets and try something new. So it's a different time, I suppose. But yeah, I will do something full time soon. It's just a question of getting through this period where I want to figure out what I want to do next, and how long I want to do that.
So if someone were listening to this and they think they've got that opportunity for you, how would they get in touch?
They can always get in touch with me through LinkedIn or email, obviously. But I think you end up. I think one thing just to add to that is, one of the big good things about transition is you end up talking to a lot of people. I talk to a lot of people every day. I'm doing these calls where I'm just trying to absorb different people. Obviously people approach you for jobs, and so you're talking to them as well. But in a lot of cases, people who are just nothing to do with what you have done before, and that gives you a perspective that I think when you're in a job, you're always when you're sitting in a job. When I was sitting at Bloomberg, you did have some of these conversations, but it was everything. Everything is bent towards how can you extract something for the company. Whereas now today, I think you kind of go with zero baggage. You're trying to just literally learn what that person is doing. So you ask those stupid questions that you have in your mind that you wouldn't ask when you're sitting in a job as president and managing director of Bloomberg Media, because you don't want to come across as stupid. But you ask those questions without any real baggage attached to it, and you learn. I think the most important thing from me is learning from something and not assuming that I don't know a lot of what, even media. I'll be honest. I mean, I'm not, I've been in these big jobs, but the thing is, essentially, there's no one can say that they know what media is. I know so many people who say that they know exactly what the strategy should be. They're lying. They're either lying or deluding themselves. Because I don't think anyone does. You got to have the humility to say, I don't know. Because if you don't, you're going to go through the path. You're going to kind of commit to a path that will lead you in a certain way, and then you would have been too far in to actually be able to say it's a failure. That happens in media, by the way. That happens a lot of people who just cannot say something is a failure openly. My point has always been, you should fail quickly. You should know that you've failed. This is failure. Move on, take the browbeat, get beaten down for it. That's fine. But take that failure and learn from it. Because I think the biggest risk is you not admitting the failure. I think media companies go through it because these are how you should do it. And in some ways, we paid the price. That's why no one went and charged a subscription fee on the internet when they're not giving it for free. The physical product is you're charging them, but when you're going online, you're not charging them. I mean, you just have to think for about 5 minutes and say, why am I doing that? Why am I giving this for free? And they would have actually, admitted that there's a problem there, and it would have evolved quicker. So I feel that media overall spends a lot of time not admitting their failures, because the leaders on top don't want to admit it because they think it's a stain on their career and all sorts of things. So so these transitions are really important for you to actually think those through. In some ways, it makes you humble, because you don't have the power and the title that go with the job you were sitting in, and that makes you more humble to begin with, I think.
Parry, to close off every conversation we have with people, we have two questions. One's a bit more lighthearted. The second one's a bit more serious. So I'll start with the first one. What is your favorite romantic comedy, rom-com film?
Whoa.
It always triggers quite a response.
Yeah. God. It's a tough one, because you know what? I don't think this is strictly a rom-com, because I don't think that term was actually invented at that time. Among the romantic movies that I think I love The Roman Holiday. I think it's a fascinating
classic
movie. That is an amazing movie. I can see it many times. Yeah. And I don't think it's a rom-com, because I don't think that term was invented then. But it's not a love actually, but it's a classic.
Amazing.
Awesome.
Amazing.
The second one to end was a little bit more serious. Okay, so you're sitting across the table from an 18-year-old Parry. What do you say to him?
Ooh, very, very interesting one, because you always when you have get-togethers with your old friends, you see a reflection of yourself in them, because you kind of know what they've known you as the 18-year-old.
Yeah.
So you kind of see a reflection of yourself in all of them. And I'm very close to all my friends, my college mates, and everyone. I would say patience. I think be patient is a very important. Patience is something I learned over time. I'm still a very impatient human being. I want everything quickly, and in some ways, my career reflects my impatience, if you can see it, because I get bored quickly. I think I would say be more patient. One, two, uh, I think be more serious about learning and the academic part of it. Because if I were to go back in time, the one thing I would change, not because it would have changed my career in any real way, is that I would have been more, I think, being more serious about studying. Till I got to college, I was not, and then after that, I became hyper academic. But it's I feel that the foundations are really important. I think patience to me is the single biggest virtue that I think I've had to learn it the hard way. And if I could tell someone, I would say be a lot more patient, because things will come. But there are some friends who say that I probably got where I am because I was less patient.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Parry. It has been a wonderful, wonderful conversation, and it's been incredible having you on. Thank you.
No, likewise. I think this is amazingly smart questions, and it's amazing how. I mean, I think you guys yourselves have had some interesting careers in the young age that you guys are in. So it's fascinating. Thank you so much for having me. It's
Hey,
been a fun
awesome.
conversation.
Really enjoyed